TopMedTalk.
Hi, it's Monty Mythen here, Editor-in-Chief of TopMedTalk. Welcome to a Happy Holiday Special. So, happy holidays. It seems a little bit strange in this rather peculiar year where COVID-19 has changed our lives probably forever, which we'll reflect on as we go along. But we've made a tradition now that during the holiday period, and we choose this one in particular because it's a transatlantic endeavor, primarily with myself and Desiree Chappell anchoring these shows. That in the UK, we don't do the Thanksgiving thing, but we both have a couple of days off around Christmas. So we do the happy holidays. And traditionally what we've done is we've carved the year up into three sections, from January to April, and then May to August, and September to December. And we've reflected on the year of recordings. Now, we talked about not doing that this year because it's been a bit of a weird one. But on reflection, we have a lot to celebrate in TopMedTalk. We're enormously grateful for everyone who's helped us to get over a big milestone, which we'll come back to in a moment. So we're in. If you celebrate Christmas, it's Christmas Eve. And usually we would be in the TopMedTalk studio, or at least pretending to be, doing our Happy Holiday Special. So I'm here in London. We're not allowed into the studio because we're still in a form of lockdown. I'm actually in London, in England. So enormous pleasure to introduce my partner in crime, Desiree Chappell. Desiree, how are you?
I'm good, Monty. So you've taken on the partner in crime thing, right?
I'm feeling a bit grey here at the moment, so I'm going to use my sort of bounce and buoyancy that would be celebrating, our Christmas special and happy holidays. But
that's right.
Let's get the smiles on. How are you?
I'm great, Monty. Thank you so much. I am in Louisville, yearning to be all over the different places that we've been. Like the rest of the world is dying to get out of their homes, but it's okay. That we can celebrate with people no matter where you are.
Well, absolutely. That's been part of the whole TopMedTalk endeavor, was to bring free open access medical education to the world. And it looks like in very many ways, the world has come to join us in that space this year. Now, we did have a momentous year. Last year, we were talking about, come on, you can get us over the 500,000 downloads. Come on, we can do it this year. We actually achieved, Desiree,
over 1 million downloads, Monty.
Over 1 million downloads. So thank you very much indeed to everyone who listens to TopMedTalk. Because you listen to TopMedTalk, we can get people to help with sponsorship, which means we can continue to deliver free open access medical education.
Yeah. And not only that they're listening, Monty, that they share with their friends, with their colleagues, with their families. All of that really helps us so much.
So here we were, come up with this idea to be the broadcasting arm of evidence-based perioperative medicine, anticipating that at some stage we'd be sort of driving the whole sort of carbon-friendly conference agenda. Yeah. And that all came tumbling down on all of us this year. So perhaps as we'll reflect as we go along, one of the silver linings of our year with COVID-19. Yeah. So normally we'd be asking the wonderful Nick Margerrison to go into the studio and fire up these holiday specials. But Nick, you're quarantined as well. You're locked down. Where are you, buddy?
I'm in the north of England, so I'm in Lancaster at the moment.
So we're zoned, Nick, which I don't know if you explained to Desiree yet. We're in zone 2 now in London. Yes. What are you in, Nick? Are you?
No idea what that
means. Okay. It's all ended in tiers here in the UK.
So which one are you in again, Nick? You're in tier?
Well, assuming I've got these the right way round, tier 3 being the most intense of them all. So we've got the most restrictions, and it is something that locally people are upset about because of the geography of the country.
In the States, we don't necessarily go by lockdown, but we have like level of infection. And then that, obviously dictates, where people are and how things are locking down. Is that kind of the same thing? Like if you're tier 3, then you're having the most infections in the country?
Yeah, it's supposed to be. And I'm a good example, actually. Here in Lancaster, we've been the focus of some national news reports because of the geography of the area, where I think it's on the basis of counties that you decide which tier you're in and the total number of cases that are in that county. And the place where I am technically is sort of the chief capital area of Lancashire. But in fact, our number of people that have got COVID and so on is significantly lower than a lot of the other places that have got tier 2 and indeed tier 1 restrictions. So there's a big controversy about it here, but it's more to do with the geography of the area than anything else. But it's led to some bad feeling, I think.
Well, for all those U.S., I'm here in Louisville, and we're in, I think, level 3 in Indiana, Kentucky.
And is that more restricted than level 1?
Oh, I'm sorry, not level. We're red. We're colors. That's right.
Okay.
Colors.
So red is quite restricted?
We're not going by restrictions on this. This is purely cases.
Oh, so you have to make your own. You make your own mind up as to what you choose to do. You can go to the bars, the restaurants, the sporting
Depends
events.
on your governor in the state. So it's state by state. So just across the river over in Indiana, they have a lot lesser restrictions for their constituency there than we have here in Kentucky. So it's different state by state, which is interesting.
So here we are in a COVID world. Now, what we typically do is we walk through the year, as I said. So I'm going to take us back to January of 2020, where I'm not even sure we'd heard of COVID-19.
Well, first of all, January 2020 seems like forever ago. Yeah. But my mom, right before that trip, she said, I've been hearing about this, disease coming out of China. Are you sure you're going to be able to go? I don't know if you're going to be able to go, on any of your trips this year. I'm like, Mom, it'll be okay. And I didn't even think twice about it.
So it was happening on the news and there was some chattering about it. But we were in London for the Association of Anaesthetists of Great Britain and Ireland's Winter Scientific Meeting. Yeah. So we were in a convention centre in right downtown London opposite our Parliament. And it just seemed like life as normal. And I don't recall there being a whole load of brouhaha, as we would say, at the conference about the possibility of the spread of a novel coronavirus as a SARS-CoV-2, or what we now know to be, or call commonly coronavirus 19. Nick, you're a fairly cautious guy when it comes to these things, and you've got your ear to the ground. Were you even thinking about it then?
Strangely enough, I thought I'd had it. And I know a lot of people have said that subsequently, but I remember thinking that I'd had it, but the timeline didn't quite match up. So maybe cautious might be the right word, or a little bit over worried. Yeah, so I think I was aware of it, but I didn't think we were going to lock. I had no idea what was going to happen, obviously.
So I went back and listened to a bunch of the sort of early in January conversations mixed in with some predictions, which we'll come back to on a later show. We typically do this, when we start the new year. But there are a number of different predictions in there, many of which played out. Not that they were predicting it in the context of COVID-19 at the time, but they played out in the sort of accelerated life that we got into. Now, because we're going to get on to the whole sort of COVID thing, Desiree, you get to pick one highlight. There was loads of great conversations at the AAGBI, but you get to pick one highlight that you remember from interviewing at that meeting. Yeah,
that was a phenomenal meeting. We really had some great conversations, but I will have to defer always to Henrik Kellett. Because first of all, I just love him. Second of all, we got to talk a lot of ERAS, which was great. But he had some other interesting topics. We've talked to him before about with the whole steroid conversation. We kind of dug deep into that a bit.
Yeah, so you were predicting that one of the words of the year, one of the topics of the year, there was a whole list that was being developed. But you said, ERAS, enhanced recovery, was still right in there, which turned out to be absolutely true. When it came to trying to get the surgery done in the wake of COVID-19, which we're still in that wake now. But also Henrik Kellett really emphasized the role of steroids and inflammation perioperatively, which also turned out to be one of the big deals of the year. Now, we weren't talking about steroids as a COVID-19 treatment then, but its anti-inflammatory effect. So should we have a listen to that, Nick?
About 3-4 years ago, there was a fascinating study from Stanford by Bryce Godelier and co-workers. And they analyzed in detail immunological signatures after hip replacement. And the outcome were time to achieve mild pain, fatigue, and hip function. And they showed a fantastic correlation about the duration of recovery versus these inflammatory changes. So we took samples from our RCT, sent it to them, with plus minus high dose steroids. And it's hopefully in press now in a very famous journal, showing in detail for the first time ever what happens with these immunological changes. And it lasted for up to 48 hours. And I think all this is fascinating. I reviewed the literature from elective surgery with high-dose steroids. A lot of questions, but it's not a safety issue. That is for sure. Efficacy is fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, it doesn't cost anything. It is simple. It is effective. It is safe. What more could you ask for? And you have a fantastic start of your enhanced recovery program regarding fatigue, pain, etc., across procedures.
Now, as we get to the back end of January, we're starting to get more rumblings, more serious rumblings about the virus. So, again, jumping ahead, this is, I think, that one of the last trips of the year, certainly for me, myself, and Professor Mike Grocott, went to Australia, which you might think is we had quite a lot of conversations about it at the time. Quite a big decision, a big old trip. We were actually going to a global pandemic meeting in Australia. And we were already starting to think about whether we should stay at home and rotas, and we talked to our colleagues about this, and travel and family and friends. And we were given the green light. We decided on balance we should go because it's an important topic, but it wasn't actually the global pandemic of COVID we were talking about. Do you remember all of this, Desiree, building up to this trip?
Yeah, the pandemic of post-op morbidity. Yeah,
exactly. So, Nick, can you just play us a clip from Mike? We're actually in Guy Ludbrook's garden. We've made it to Australia via Singapore, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. But we're in Guy Ludbrook's garden, appropriately socially distanced outside, reflecting on the global pandemic meeting we've just had. And Mike's explaining the challenges we have for outcomes following major surgery.
Okay, here we go.
So the mortality rate in Mets was relatively low. It's a thing of exercise studies that they tend to select fitter people.
So it's around the 1%
but
mark?
It's around 1%, and the morbidity rate is 10-15%.
10-15%, so that's the point. So, Guy, we're very much drawn to, globally, you attracted a lot of attention by writing an article published in the British Journal of Anaesthesia. Can you remind us of the title of that? It started about the hidden pandemic.
The hidden pandemic of post-operative complications, time to focus on systems analysis, which is a kind of clunky title, but where it came from was really looking at the National Emergency Laparotomy Audit and to see what made a difference. And what was intriguing was it wasn't having a consultant in the operating room, it wasn't having very careful and exotic fluid monitoring. The thing that was associated with the biggest decrease in mortality was having a post-operative geriatric review.
All right, that was a great trip. Monty, I know we had a ton of conversation about that meeting and, where you going to go and how is all that going to work. So tell us a little bit about what that actually looked like, because it was not a normal, world trip that you have taken in the past.
So as I said, we reflected a lot about whether we should go or not and took the appropriate advice and made provision for doing it as quickly as possible. What was really, really interesting is we left a relatively normal UK.
Yeah.
And we arrived in a relatively normal Australia. They were being sensible, as I said, about social distancing and hand hygiene and things that seemed to make sense at the time.
Were they taking your temperature or anything there whenever you arrived?
Not in Australia, not in the UK. But when we went, we went through Singapore. And Singapore was heat scanners and brow scanning. And we were kettled into different areas. We were separated by Perspex shields. We had to wear a mask. Everyone was wearing masks. It was just like, it felt like a weird world, but it now feels like normal. It feels like the world that we now live in. And it's interesting to reflect, I'm sure we'll come back to this, how some of those countries handled the threat of the spread of this virus very differently to the one we left from and the one we landed in. Even though, having said that, Australia, New Zealand have been some of the great success stories in locking down early and hard COVID-19.
Yeah. which has all been debatable in all of those different countries. But so when you got home, Monty, you guys were really talking about it was a lockdown, and within just a week or two.
So a few weeks later, we were, it's called back up to join the intensive care unit rota, as sort of Dad's army, as I refer to myself to go in for the emergency rotas that looked like we might have to put together. And the big debate nationally in the UK was whether big sporting events should go ahead. I don't remember, Nick, do you remember this sort of kerfuffle about the Cheltenham Festival and rugby internationals and visiting football teams from Italy?
Yeah, I remember, as a result of obviously hearing what you guys were talking about and being involved in TopMedTalk, I was someone who believed that we needed a hard, fast, strong lockdown, and that it needed to happen yesterday. And we'll come on to some of the reasons why that was, but it was very difficult. There's a very difficult period where there was a feeling in the UK that nothing was going to be done about this. And also, I've got friends, I've got you guys going in to go and work in hospitals, and it's some terrible new disease. And by this point, I'm not under the impression that I'd had it anymore. I didn't know what it was. So I personally was really emotionally involved because I was worried about you guys, and there's no getting around that. I was really worried about what was going to happen.
So I was nervous. I don't know how you were feeling at the time, Desiree.
Oh, it was incredibly distressing. Because at the time, I was just doing some part-time work at the time. And so shuffling around a couple different facilities and hearing the chit chatter, and, a lot of people were not here in my area. I can speak for that. We're not really taking this very seriously. And we were starting to have some of our conversations. And so it was really distressing to hear what we were hearing on an international level and then bring it back home where it's like, this is just another cold, it's just another flu.
Yeah.
And so that was really, to me, some of the most stressful times that I've had in my career, really.
So we were getting, in London, we were getting reports from Italy in particular. Yeah. We'd had the reports originally from China, and now we could see that it was a tsunami coming. Yeah. And we were now getting stressed about rotas and additional rotas, and colleagues starting to get sick, and lack of PPE. So the real stress of that you were going to be called up to the front line, and there was going to be no protective equipment. And that was getting very, very... I for the first time in my medical career, I remember being scared. I don't remember having that fear of my own fragility before.
Even through like the Ebola,
Ebola,
scares,
HIV,
and
all multiple scary infections. I mean, we had one of the sort of isolation rooms in London, and I remember the early days of HIV. I don't remember ever being scared. I thought it was our job to run towards the flames.
Yes.
And I don't remember. That, but I was nervous of my own fragility, and I think in a way I got lucky, because I caught Ebola. Sorry, I didn't catch Ebola. I caught, if you remember, I caught COVID-19 very early. It was a good few weeks after we got back from Australia, but it was already starting to get through the community in London. And by the end of March, I had confirmed COVID-19, and I got quite sick.
But I was going to walk it back to say, you got back from Australia, and I think we kind of made the decision at that point that we were going to start talking about COVID, on a daily, if weekly, if not daily basis, because there was so much information coming out, and we thought it would be really good to help our listeners disseminate and to wade through some of that. So I think our very first COVID podcast was on March 16th.
March 16th, wow. Because remember, when I got back, I made a decision to self-quarantine.
Right.
Having been on a long journey, coming back through Singapore, I decided to self-quarantine for a minimum of 14 days. And I pushed back my first scheduled shift for intensive care. So I stayed at home. And during that, when I say self-quarantining, I mean, I was there with my wife and my daughter, who were going out each day, et cetera, et cetera. And during that period, I towards the back end of it, I caught COVID-19.
Yeah.
So without going near the hospital. So I did not acquire it in the hospital. And it appears as though I did not bring it back from Australia with me, but I acquired it from my community with limited contact.
I mean, just to context this, you and Mike Grocott had celebrated your retirement. You'd been taken out of retirement. And I remember saying to you, can't you just not go? Do you remember me saying that?
Yeah, I don't remember all of that. You can listen to it on TopMedTalk. I've retired from being, first on call for critical care. I hadn't retired as a physician. I hadn't retired from my position at the university, etc. I was still working and planning to carry on working. But I've retired from the nights and weekends in the main intensive care unit. So that's the bit I was nervous about, getting back into the full PPE and getting my, nose right in there, which turned out to be completely inappropriate fear, because the PPE worked really, really well. And it appears as though almost nobody, if nobody, has caught the COVID-19 right in the front line. What was becoming more obvious then is you were much more likely to catch it in the line at the coffee shop, or on your way to work on the bus, or the poor chap at the door, or the taxi driver, or the bus driver. Yeah. And that's why we had that disconnect between what the government was telling us about the chances of acquiring it and masks or no masks. I got one particular interview at the time, I got a number of them. Maybe I was getting mad at the time. I got quite irate.
We were working you really hard when you had a COVID, Monty. I'm sorry.
I don't know if you want to remember a particular rant you want to play, Nick.
Okie dokie.
TopMed Talk.
I got pretty vexed about this early on, because, I read the reports. I get the feed from the New England Journal of Medicine, of many of us do. So I got the early reports in February coming through from the first around 1,000 patients from Wuhan. And I read down the list of signs and symptoms. And although fever and cough were the most common, everything was in there. So it seemed pretty clear to me that although the public messaging was, you don't worry about it if you've just got a head cold, it's all about fever and it's all about cough. I read that paper, which is freely available. It's open access. I retweeted it the other day. Everything people were dismissing was on the list of signs and symptoms of COVID-19 you can have without fever and cough. So I've had friends who said, I'm going to work because I've just got a bit of a cold. I've got a dribbly nose and I had a bit of a sore throat. They've been tested for COVID-19 now, and they're COVID-19 positive. So I'm not sure why that, I'm going to call it propaganda, because that's what it is by the true definition of it. I'm not sure why that was put out in that way. I'm not sure why it's still discoverable on many websites as being what COVID-19 is like. COVID-19 can be a bit of diarrhea. COVID-19 can be absolutely nothing. You can be an asymptomatic carrier.
Is it?
Well, the idea you say, well, tell me what you've got. Oh, I've got dry eyes. I've had a little bit of a dicky tummy and I've got a slightly dribbly nose. Oh, well, you're okay. Off you go.
Yeah. That's
fine. Get into handover, go and look after patients without reverse protecting the patients. As far as I can see, it's pure nonsense. It's pure nonsense. If you're bad enough to have a fever and a cough, you're not going into work anyway, because you're pretty crook at that stage.
Yeah.
So you've worked that out for yourself. This kind of reassurance that seemed to go with it to say to people, no, it's okay. You've just got a bit of a sore throat and a bit of a dribbly nose. You're all right, crack on. Was not supported by the available evidence at all. I'm hoping to find out someday why that propaganda was shared through the different countries. I'm trying to work out what the gain was thought to be in sharing that known to be untrue at the time of sharing piece of information. So I was getting irate because we were sitting there preparing for these various different podcasts. I'd been unwell around that time. I was spending almost all day reading the literature, and we were interviewing people around the world, and we were getting such mixed messages. So
one of the things that I find interesting about that, Monty, is you're saying that it appears there was information that was released which was known to be wrong, that was downplaying the risk of COVID-19 by minimizing the symptoms. And that seems to be part of, there's a push, isn't there? There's 2 points of view. Some people think we should never have locked down before, locked down at all. And then other people believe that we didn't lock down quick enough, hard enough, fast enough, and so on. And that seems to suggest that that was a deliberate policy to me. If they're putting out information that's not addressing all of the symptoms, that seems to be calming people down in the face of what we're now describing as a tsunami, to me, that seems like one of the fingerprints of that policy mistake.
Well, these are discussions we continue to have every week, Nick, aren't they? That's why they're very, very difficult decisions. And I think to be fair at this stage is it's still too early to judge, who got it right and who got it wrong. My prejudice, my bias is that a hard early lockdown and waiting for the vaccine, which is now upon us, would have been a much more successful strategy for the people in our country, both for their well-being, for their survival, and also for the financial consequences. But that might turn out to be wrong. It might turn out that the so-called herd immunity as a result of taking a different approach may ultimately play out to be more successful, because some of the anti-vaxxers would have been vaccinated by the community by getting it. So early days, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think, to be perfectly honest, I mean, we're still dealing with those questions, and some of it, I think, could have been misinformation. Some of it was people were kind of just doing the best they could on what we had at the time, and who they decided to listen to, whether or not they thought that was correct information or not, or whether they believed it, and whether the person feeding that information was, in fact, telling the truth or knew exactly what was happening. So I think that, it's tough, and you hate to be completely critical about the whole situation, because this is one of the first times we've had to deal with this in modern history. And so, I mean, whether or not somebody got it right, it looks like there are some countries that did, and some countries that we're still going to be dealing with it for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think the frustration we're all sharing is, and I don't think this is just using the luxury of hindsight, is that all the podcasts we did at the time, so information that was freely available, played out to be a pretty universal truth. So in other words, masks, social distancing, locking down. And then the whole, I know, Nick, you're going to, I think, play for us the Italian story. It just seemed crystal clear from that interview in mid-March what was coming and what we had to do. I've spoken far too much. I suggest that of the 50 or so podcasts that we recorded during March and April, Desiree, about COVID-19, I'm going to suggest we choose one each, and I'm going to go first because it's the first one we tried to record.
And we were just getting into it.
I got up, I'd arranged really fast out of the block to interview Professor Mike Irwin from Hong Kong. I thought, what a great person to interview in China, in part of China which has to a certain extent seen it all before. And there's two elements I want to bring out of this is Mike explaining their immediate reaction to it, and as a result of that, by locking down hard and fast, how little COVID-19 that they saw. Should we listen to that for 1 second?
And I think with our experience of the SARS coronavirus crisis that we had in 2003, which didn't actually reach the UK or Europe at that time, we had some idea of what to prepare for, and stood us in good stead, in fact.
But the second thing that really got me was Mike explaining the contrast between Hong Kong and his daughter's experience of being on the underground, the tube in London. So if we quickly listen to that as well.
I mean, our government comes in for a lot of criticism, actually, for a whole host of reasons. But in terms of this, they were fairly quick to do things. The only thing that they were criticised for was they were a bit cautious about closing the border with China. You know, the doctors here wanted them to close the China border because that would be a way of obviously trying to stop it, and they didn't do that. So they've come in for a bit of criticism for that point of view. But aside from that, got to it pretty quickly. And of course, the other thing, having had the experience, this was only 17 years ago when we had SARS. You don't feel stupid wearing a mask, for example, or anything. Whereas my eldest daughter, who was in Switzerland and then went to London, actually just in the early phase of the outbreak, just sent me a picture from the London Underground with packed full of people, nobody wearing masks. Community spread was already starting in the UK at that time. Honestly, you would not go into a supermarket, public transport here without wearing a mask. You feel like a leper or something.
So there we were, to a certain extent, where some of us are still getting these mixed messages about masks, no masks, the danger, etc. So Desiree, there we are. The three of us listening to all these things and getting confused about what to do next. What about your thought process? And mixed in with that is, what's your clip you want to choose from that period?
I know that, well, I don't really want to steal Nick's thunder. So I'm actually going to give it over to Nick first to talk about what his picks were. Because I think that those probably were some of the most impactful podcasts that we've ever done on TopMedTalk.
Yeah, absolutely. Of all of the pieces we've made this year, this one sent an absolute chill to the core of my bones. And it's shocking. I highly recommend that people go back and listen to it again, particularly if you're in an area of the world where COVID-19 has not yet cast its shadow properly. This is powerful stuff. And let's have a listen. These are the guys in Italy.
So the hospital is totally paralyzed and is totally contaminated. So actually, if we receive a pregnant patient, because the pregnant patient have to give a baby, and there is no space, the clean space, to allow a sure cesarean section or a sure delivery. If we receive a child with appendicitis, we have to do surgery, and we don't know if the operator or the anesthetist are a symptomatic colonized operator. And this is the situation of the central hospital.
That is just still amazing interview, it all played out.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, honestly, like speechless. It's hard to render us speechless, Monty.
It's still playing out.
It is.
I'm on intensive care again.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to spending part of the holidays. We're still admitting patients. We're still on the brink again of being overwhelmed with COVID-19 in London. I don't know what it's like where you are, Desiree, but still.
It's extremely, extremely affecting our communities here. And I mean, it's small. I mean, we're small towns, I mean, the elderly care homes have just been decimated, death rates of up to 20% of this patient population. I mean, it is just like wildfire spreading through these communities that are not doing the things that like those Italians told us way back when. Now, I will tell you some of the silver lining of that is that, we did learn and change the way that we are treating our COVID patients. So our death rates are not as high as they were initially. And that was one of the things that we kind of, we worked through about is it an ARDS patient? Is it not? Other lines, we did work through that a little bit, but the whole CPAP story and delaying intubation, in this second wave that we've seen, we are not putting the number of people on the ventilators. We are not, we're not seeing that as much, and really trying to back off and using some of these other treatments that have come through and that we're using. So I think we have lived and learned. I think there's still some things that we need to work through, and hopefully we can just get to the vaccine. But I think, unfortunately for us here in the Midwest, and I know I keep saying that, but even on the coast, I mean, it's going to be a long time before many of these people in our country see a vaccine. There's only so many frontline. Yeah, I mean, it's really going to take a while. And hopefully we can get our elderly or above 65 population vaccinated pretty quickly, because that's really hitting us hard right now.
So we say there's been many
doom and gloom still, but
well, let's as we close this section, a couple of little positives.
Yes.
So we're going to close with the vaccine, okay? But I suggest that of the conversations we had, people were rapidly adapting their delivery of healthcare.
Yes.
So if you choose one of the positives there, Desiree, what would you go for?
Well, I mean, it was really hard to choose because we did have some other really great conversations that we didn't even talk about. You know, Tim Cook. We did a fundraising event with your friend Jim. He did a musical step for us, which was fantastic. And we kind of got into some really technical conversations too. But one of my favorite conversations was with Carol Peden, who I absolutely love and who has been a frequent guest here on Top Med Talk and in our EBPOM family. But we talked to her about all the innovation that she was leading in there in Southern California. And she had already been working on some telehealth programs. And so it was really exciting to talk to her and hear about how those really were driven, pushed through and accelerated because of this. And how, what I loved about it was that she talked about how well people were adapting. Because, when we talk about telehealth and integrating technology into patient care, whether it be patient facing or not, is the adoption process. And how many of us are like, I don't want to deal with technology. Our elderly population, some of our underserved population won't be able to utilize it. And, what they were finding was that actually it was working really well, and that they really scaled it up. They scaled up the education for their providers. And this was a really successful program for her. And we talked to her actually throughout the year and heard about her success story. So let's, Nick, tee up Carol for us.
Let's have a listen.
A major challenge to healthcare has forced us to do something very differently, very quickly. All the previous barriers which have been discussed, there was always a system in inertia, people's hesitancy to do something different, payment issues, worries about patient access. We've managed to cope with them all in a very short space of time. And we've got data on our patient feedback, and, we're getting 95% satisfaction rates from our patients and families about the service they're getting.
So as we conclude the summary of our first 4 months, as we close, wishing you a happy holidays, and for those who are celebrating Christmas, a Merry Christmas Eve. We'll see you tomorrow on Christmas Day. I want to close with an upbeat message. This was recorded by Geoff Lacey, one of our other anchors, earlier in the year, when he's talking about the early development of a vaccine.
Can you give us an overview of this trial and what role your team at St. George's is playing in the effort?
Yes, as you say, we are one of the sites in a phase 1, phase 2 vaccine trial with this vaccine. The vaccine is from Oxford University. It's called the Chadox vaccine, which means it's a chimpanzee adenovirus vectored vaccine. This is technology that has been developed at Oxford University. They have used this for other vaccine candidates, for example, most recently MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, another coronavirus. And we're very excited to be part of this. The first phase is phase 1, phase 2, will be around 500 or so subjects, and will proceed from there, we hope, if safety in particular is demonstrated, and we have every reason to believe that will be the case, into the phase 3 trial. And the phase 3 trial, of course, will be the big trial in which the efficacy of the vaccine against coronavirus disease, SARS coronavirus 2 disease, will be assessed. And we will be participating in that study, as will 4 or 5 other trial sites around the UK.
And on the day of recording this, because we got in early this year because we don't know what's going to happen, so on the 8th of December, the first patient outside of a clinical trial in the UK received a COVID-19 vaccination.
Top Med Talk.
Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.